Hi, Rick Harsh here. I'm reviewing Colin O'Sullivan's My Perfect Cousin. And the first thing I'm thinking about is that this would be called a book of realism. And I'll get to more about that in a moment. But a really, really great work of realism is a kind of miracle, I think, in that you are without, if you're in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, and please don't ask me what they're doing, because I don't consider, my books are never considered realist, but I consider it realist. So there's a whole lot to talk about there, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Colin O'Sullivan's My Perfect Cousin, which is the second book of his that I've read. I had no idea what to expect because the first book, I would call it a work of Japanese fiction. It was first-person Japanese fellow, and it felt very much like a Japanese book, not just because it took place in Japan. There were certain elements of the prose that struck me as, very reminiscent of many Japanese novels I read. This is a book of realism that takes place in a small town, small village in Ireland. And it's about primarily cousins who are 15 years old and get, as it says on the back, so, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what's on the back, that they're perhaps too close. And what I'm getting at about this odd miracle of great fiction writing in a realist, conventionally called realist novel, is that you become so absorbed in the story that that old cliche that I hate so much about characters being likable or not likable, and that lead to all kinds of bullshit from agents and editors, and for me the characters didn't come to life. For me, it's just so easy to say. I didn't like that character, and didn't seem to be a fully rounded character. But in the hands of someone like O'Sullivan, who knows what he's doing, it is done with such ease, with such facility, that before long, you're very deeply engaged in the novel. And this, in my case, despite the fact that I kept thinking about the difference between this and his other book, I was looking for the O'Sullivan of the other book, and I didn't find that O'Sullivan, which makes a great deal of sense now that I'm done, because he's writing about rural Ireland here, and so it's probably a very Irish book. I don't know. That's a difficult thing to say because my favorite Irish writers have always been lunatics. Joyce and Beckett and O'Brien, and three very different writers. And this is not anything like any of them. It's a realistic novel about real teenagers in Ireland, cousins, in a very poor village, an uninspiring village in the 1980s. 80s music plays a big role in the novel. these two cousins have different tastes in music, and their personalities. In the case of the boy, the personality is extremely um, uh, in tune with the music. Um, but what 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 began to fascinate me was um, how deeply into the novel I was, and how quickly I was. I always, I pick up any kind of book and I'm questioning a lot of things as I go on, um, trying to will myself to yield to the author, sometimes. And I love what Stephen Moore once said, and I may have mentioned this before. What Stephen Moore once said when talking to Michael Silverblatt about someone who didn't like a certain novel, said, I told him, well, read it again. And I thought, yeah, that's really true. Um, like in my case, one book that I liked quite a bit, but was somehow still disappointed in, was William Gass's The Tunnel. And I know that it's because of my frame of mind, my expectations, and I did not yield enough to Gass. Um, and I've looked through the book since then many times, and it's a brilliant book. And now I need to read it again. I'm lucky because I yielded to Gaddis. So even though I've started Recognitions a second time more than once, I don't feel the actual urgency that I do with The Tunnel. Um, this one, uh, I don't know if I will read it again because it's stark and the story is is told and you won't forget it. And you know, I I might, if I were to study the book, I would study the prose carefully to see how it's done. Um, it's an amazing thing to start with nothing and to invent characters, and in a very short time have them engage the reader to such an extent that the reader is entirely within that universe. And this happened to me in such a way that I liked these two so much. And maybe not everybody would, but they appealed to me. They had already, um, let's see, it says here, how close is too close? Well, they had already raised that question, let me just tell you. If this is a spoiler and that's a spoiler, you're spoiled, but you don't have to allow that. I mean, it's right on the back. You know that something is going to happen, but you don't know how it's going to happen, how much it's going to happen, and how it's going to work out. But um, I'm leaving out a lot of the story, so I'm spoiling the review now. But I reached page 145, which is basically the halfway point of the novel. The novel is 286 pages. And I wrote here to remind myself the moment I want to stop so no one gets hurt. That was the real feeling I had, a very intense feeling, because I knew someone was going to get hurt. And I loved where they were at that point. I loved the frame of mind that these two kids had um, um, gained at that time, and their complicity. And speaking of complicity, it made me think a lot about the reader's complicity we're responsible for um, uh, going through with the reading of the book. If I would have stopped here, I would have been very happy for these two characters. And I won't spoil the book by telling you how happy or unhappy I am with them at the end. But things do get quite intense. Um, I didn't think that the time frame of the book would be as compressed as it is. And that makes it all the more remarkable to me that O'Sullivan is able to um, elucidate these characters, and not just the main two. They both of them have absentee fathers, and at one point, the boy who wants to be a musician and he listens to music like The Cure, The Smiths, the Pogues were never mentioned. I'd be interested to know what the boy would think of the Pogues. There must be at least boys from the county hell. I mean, could he not like that one? Probably not stylistically disruptive enough. He's got a bit of anger in him. Both of the cousins, their mothers were the sisters, and they didn't like each other. And the both of them had fathers leave when they were fairly young, and so they became close. The girl is an epileptic, and there are some really wonderful scenes where she has a seizure, and the boy knows how to deal with it, and it's just his tenderness towards her. I mean, there are scenes of those two walking together and having a teenage argument. He tells her music is shite, and she doesn't think much of his music either. Um, there's interesting developments along the way. In the beginning, he seems like the more dominant personality. In the end, or as it goes on, there's more depth to her than you realize, and I don't know how much more I want to say about that because I want to talk about this whole thing about realism, and realism has gotten a bad name, but I don't think that it's ever aptly applied or not applied. Um, for instance, one of the books that is not considered realism is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And yet, when he wrote that book, he combined two genuine voices that he imagined and knew, voice of his grandmother and of a child. Real voices, real Colombian voices. And he captured Colombian reality in his way. And he even once said about his writing that there's nothing in there that doesn't happen, and a remarkable thing for the most commonly thought of person when you mention magical realism. Remarkable thing for him to say. And in my own case, when people first mentioned metafiction to me, I hadn't heard the term. I'm a bumpkin. Um, and, my reaction to it was, all right, if you want to call it that, fine. The best I've heard is hyper realism, but I don't think that's even accurate either. There's just a way of presenting a story. Um, but when you present it in a very straightforward fashion, this is not satirical, it's not a comedy, and the artistry in that is much less obvious. The prose itself picks some picks up interestingly a bit of poetic steam as things get more severe in the novel, as things occur that are more severe. That's one talent I can point out. His other book that I read, um, the Japanese book. What is the name of it? Dementia. Um, my traveling circus. No, my perfect cousin. Let's look it up and just give me indulge. Oh Jesus, it's already over 16 minutes. Thought this was going to be quick. The Star Lover Sings. Um, that one, the poetry ran throughout. Bits of poetry, sometimes a rough sort of poetry. And in this book, I noticed an absence of poetic writing, yet effective writing, until things um, got tense, and then there's um, the kind of thing that in my writing would lead to wild writing. His poetry is more subdued, but it's good. He knows how to use repetition, um, and he's also got a lot of what happens a lot in the book is there's characters like the uncle who takes care of the girl when her mother dies, and so his prose is in different heads at different times. He does that quite well, and there's a poetry to that also, in rendering the way people are thinking, but without it's not stream of consciousness, but he's rendering the way that they're thinking quite well, and extremely effectively. It's a powerful book. Um, I don't think that the ending or anything that happens in it um, was inevitable, and that makes it surprising. And it is surprising, and some of it you can guess. Um, some aspects you can guess because of the preface. Um, he's giving stuff away in the preface, but not much. You don't know what's really going to happen. And if you read the back of the book, you don't really know what's going to happen, um, how severe the events are going to appear. And there's nothing really that happens that I cared about at the end that could have been different. Um, I was won over, and I knew that something, some degree of tragedy would probably occur, but I didn't know what it would be, and I really didn't care. Um, I mean, I knew on page 145 that these two were in for some trouble, and there was trouble, and that's all I'm going to tell you so that you're not spoiled. I highly recommend myself to read um, the first book by Colin O'Sullivan because I'm going out of order now. I read I don't know which one. The Starved Lover Sings might have been his third or fourth, and this is his second. I want to go back and read the first and then read the rest of them, and I will. Um, and so I recommend the author. I'm not sure if I am comfortable recommending an order in which to read him, but it's the most important thing, probably in the end, is that the writing is excellent, but the observer of humanity is keen and brilliant. And you know, a lot of writers have written about teenagers, and so he's not tackling a new subject, and yet he's able to very very easily sort of, without, I was kind of caught off guard because I was thinking about my themes and, what I expected, thinking about what realism is, and just as sometimes one does when reading a book, thinking, okay, it's Colin O'Sullivan again. What's it going to be like? And yet, while that happened, I wasn't distracted as much as it might seem like I'm suggesting I was. I was very quickly drawn to the characters, and nothing rang false at all. And that's a miraculous thing. You start with nothing, and these people didn't exist. Um, Even if he based them on his own childhood, people he knew, doesn't matter. They don't exist, but somehow they're conjured. It's a miracle. Fiction's great, and so thanks again, Betimes Books and Colin O'Sullivan for a great reading experience.